I hope everybody is having a fantastic Friday so far. Wonderful to see so many participants rolling in. Happy Future Friday, everybody. Is it really August 1st already? Wow, we started this series not long ago. It's incredible to be here right now. Welcome, everyone. My name is James Darius Ball. I am the Director of Future Cities at the National Building Museum. And today we are exploring the future of cities as a nexus of mobility. For those of you who have been joining Future Fridays over the last 5 months, you know that we've been exploring cities as an optimistic perspective through all different aspects of the economy and innovation and housing and resilience. So today we're diving deep into this topic of mobility. And it's such a critical conversation and so much innovation being taken place in this space. We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you all. Before we get into that, I need to say that Future Fridays is a part of the Future Cities Initiative at the National Building Museum. And the Future Cities Initiative is this multi-year interdisciplinary exploration of cities in all of its facets. So stay tuned and join us as we continue on this journey together. I have to give a shout out to our sponsors to start off. AARP, Enterprise and Wells Fargo, Wayne and Ursula Quinn, Rooted Communities, National League of Cities, and KPF. We have a growing collection of partners and organizations that are supporting this work. We're deeply grateful for making that possible for us. So the topic, as I said, is mobility. We have a group of speakers that represent different sectors of this. And most importantly, we want to hear your perspective about the future of cities and mobility. So you'll see you've just gotten an invitation to Slido. Slido lets you all participate in a conversation in the chat while we're having a conversation on video and speaking. We would love for you all to introduce yourselves. As you go into Slido, you'll see there's a Q&A section right there. We're not using as Q&A. We're just going to use that as a chat function where you can share your name, organization, where you're calling in from. And once you share, other people can reply to your message. So if you see somebody you'd like to get to know, please send them a reply, introduce yourself. You'll also note that there's a function to do a thumbs up. So as we get into our ideas cast later, you can use that as a participatory way to also recognize and elevate each other's opinions as we get into it. So while you all are introducing yourselves in the chat, I am thrilled to get to introduce our speakers for today. What an incredible lineup. I'm going to start with Mayor Quinton Lucas, who is the mayor of Kansas City, Missouri. Born and raised in Kansas City's inner city, Quinton Lucas serves as the 55th mayor of Kansas City, the youngest person elected to the role since 1855. As mayor, he has built opportunity for Kansas Cityans from all neighborhoods at all income levels, including the adoption of one of the first zero-fare transit initiatives, which maintains fare-free public transit for passengers on bus and rail transit citywide, putting hundreds of dollars back in passengers' pockets. Mayor, we are so grateful to have you here. Really looking forward to hearing your dose of optimism in a moment.
Well, good day, everybody. Happy Friday. It's exciting to be with you. I know you're introducing, but looking forward to it.
Awesome. Our next panelist is Steven Segerlin, the head of commercial development at Amtrak. Join us on camera for a moment, Steven. Steven is a city planner and real estate developer specializing in design and financing strategies for large, complex, mixed-use projects and portfolios. Steven's projects support state and local governments and transit authorities to create inclusive, connected, livable cities that are financially and environmentally sustainable. I've had the pleasure of knowing Steven for a great amount of time here and are so excited to hear your expertise with everyone.
Thanks again.
And finally, we have William Chernikoff, the Senior Manager of Global Research and Innovation at Toyota Mobility Foundation. William started with Toyota Motor North America in January of 2009 and has been supporting the Global Foundation for the last 8 years, where he leads efforts in technology, policy, and communication. His work includes analyzing sustainability, climate change, and energy impacts of technology development and deployment, coupled with energy and environmental policy in Toyota's North American vehicle and technology mix. Also had the pleasure of hearing William speak before, brings an incredible expertise to this. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Excited to engage in the conversation with everybody.
I'm also loving seeing all the introductions that are coming in through the chat. I see we have a great DC metro area representation. Also, people calling in from Ithaca, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and all different professions and areas. So thrilled to see this diversity of participation in our audience as well. And you can see the diversity of perspectives we're bringing to this conversation at the museum. Without further ado, let me click over to our dose of optimism. Mayor Q, I welcome you to come back on camera and look forward to hearing you set the stage for us with a dose of optimism.
So again, hello everybody. I'm Quentin Lucas. I'm in Kansas City. I actually got to start my week at training camp for my NFL team, the Kansas City Chiefs. It's an exciting time if you're a football fan. It's all right around the corner, but my dose of optimism, of course, speaks to the work that we all do together. It has been a busy time for us as we consider transit in Kansas City. We have expanded our streetcar line. It is now operational. It's going through federal testing and will open this fall. We also have the opportunity to work with our bus system on how we can expand more routes and create better access for Kansas Cityans from all walks of life, and certainly make sure that this Midwestern city is one that can truly be walkable, even in the midst of a car culture. Things don't need to be in conflict. Instead, they can actually all relate closely. So that's a part of what makes me optimistic. But the real thing, because I'm a bit of a nerd on these issues as well, I once served on my city's Board of Zoning Adjustment, is that we're actually seeing better urban planning long-term in connection with it too. A big part of the streetcar line in Kansas City wasn't just transit that took you from the Missouri River in our downtown area to other cultural districts throughout the city. But it was also to work on things like how do you build good infill that has no parking requirements, something that doesn't exist on the streetcar line at all? How do we make sure that we're continuing to grow density in areas, and certainly an area like this one, where there is great greenfield availability on the edge of the city and certainly throughout our suburbs? And how do we make sure that we're building connections with a city that is way too divided in racial terms and in other demographic areas? That has been a positive with us. I also want to say, having worked with the EPA just this morning on a brownfields grant, we talked about the award of several $1,000,000 to our city. There are wonderful civil servants, bureaucrats, but folks who are working right now to make sure that good programmatic efforts are being done in all of our communities. Every week, I have the opportunity to work with people at USDOT, at EPA, and what I want to tell them is good job. You're still delivering on a lot of important laws that we have seen passed in recent years. You're still making sure resources get to communities. And more than anything, a city like mine and the other mayors I talk to, from America's largest city to some of our smallest ones, are continuing to commit to that work with you as we keep going. So I could talk football season. I can talk 2026 FIFA World Cup, which is coming to Kansas City and 10 other American markets. But I'll stop there on my optimism, which is that we're still building, we're still caring about transit, we're still caring about walkability, even here in Middle America in a particularly hot summer. So look forward to your questions later and looking forward to the conversation.
Mayor, thank you so much. A fantastic way to kick us off here. I want to welcome everybody, all my panelists, to just come onto camera right now. And the audience, if you'd like to ask any questions, please use Slido for that. So you can go straight into, again, that Q&A section right there. Ask your questions for the mayor, and would welcome anything to come up now, as we just have about maybe 15 minutes of the general Q&A, and then we'll move into that more participatory ideas cast. Mayor, I'd like to kick off and ask you, you immediately brought in this idea of mobility as creating connection. And I appreciate that kind of I think that word and of a human kind of way of thinking about that, right? Literally by letting people move through a city, they can connect to each other. There is that's a question of creating relationships. And you brought in the question of economic disparities, right, in that as well, right? How we connect communities in that regard. So I wonder if you can just elaborate a little bit more on that, of when you think about transportation. I'm sure we'll think of that in just the physical infrastructure sense, maybe later in this conversation. But to lead us a little bit further on this kind of human-centric view of how you think about transportation and mobility in your city as related to your citizens.
It has required a real change for Kansas City because, like many markets, particularly in Middle America, right, you always had a transit agency. You would look at performance, but you weren't actually looking at our customers, our end run users. How do they have access with the system? And frankly, how well is it doing in changing times, by the way, in terms of getting people to healthcare facilities, educational institutions, and even post-COVID? We still had a model that was very built up and developed for heavy duty commercial office use at a time when, sadly for us mayors, right, you don't have as many people coming into your central business district just for the commercial office use. So what we have seen in many ways is a metamorphosis over recent years that says, one, how do we survey more regularly our riders? How are we actually looking at things like new permitting, understanding where multifamily expansion is happening in our city, to look to how we build out a system going forward? How do new forms of transportation work within it? And that is in being realistic with the existence of rideshare, being realistic with other services that aren't the same length as buses traditionally. And frankly, how can you, through great design, and I know we'll get to it later, but again, old zoning adjustment board guy, how do you actually make sure that TOD is more than just policies on a page, but it is something where you're being, to the extent possible, a bit more compulsory and suggesting to developers that this is a key part of how we do things on major transit lines now. It isn't just some sort of luxury, and it's not the sort of thing where we still are letting you build a traditional grocery store with a big parking lot in front, or frankly, even a little parking lot in front, which it shocks me, and the other panelists may know this, even in a major American city, right? You'll still bump into people who say, but this is how we build insert franchise here.
Yeah.
And, having that chat is something that I think is where we continue to put our own consumers first, our residents today, and the people who will be here in the future.
That's a great response. And we are going to get more into this visioning. So I'm going to save us a little bit back from what this looks like. But maybe just to stay in this, you brought up these kind of the pandemic, the changes in work at home lifestyle. So we are operate like this question, this conversation is in a different context than if it was 5, 10 years ago. And so I wonder, just to elaborate, and I'll welcome the other panelists to respond to this one as well, but just how is this moment different? What are the forces that are shaping your decision making? What are some of those kind of here's why we need a new conversation right now? What are those different forces that are changing the way we're approaching transportation at the moment? Do you want to start with that, Mayor, and then maybe I
Yeah,
can pass it
I'll go
over
ahead and
to
start.
Stephen and Wayne?
Um, Urban centers have, my God, gone through a number of changes. Actually, for the questions later, I have been mayor since 2019, which actually kind of makes me an OG mayor now of major cities. And I've seen some come and go in cities. I love them all. Don't worry, I won't get into those fights. But yeah, how we congregate has like changed in some ways. Certainly, how we are doing commerce in our city has changed. And even when you look at convention and tourism spaces, right, the desire to have more outdoor engagement, the desire, frankly, to never just sit in gigantic rooms ever again, whether it be an office or whether it be just sitting at the Javits Center taking the bar exam, which, sorry, I'm a lawyer, so that's what a lot of my friends were doing, right? We have seen that change. So for us, I think what we are trying to do is look to the extent we can model it out in any real way, if not more individual situations, looking at how people in certain areas of our city are engaging both with transit and with other city services, looking at how we are enhancing, I think, the experience for people to go to major events such that they'll want to stay in the city longer. And that actually isn't just for major events, that's just in everyday life. And I think more fundamentally, we are continuing to think about how you can have access for all of that. This is where I'll talk to public safety just a bit. Returning citizens, those confronting homelessness, the crowds you're not always thinking about when you're building out transit models. I know you folks are, but sometimes others aren't, are a big part of what it is that we need to do and have to do. So you can't just look to, say, arrest and hassle all the homeless folks who are near transit stops or on transit. right? You do, in our city, and I think many others, are trying to say, how can we rehouse? How do we make sure services are accessible? And frankly, how do you make sure that some notice of those available services exists within your transit network, which is your place to kind of see everyone? Final point here is this, right? That if we are trying to get kids and families, you try to get a lot of messaging near schools. It's always been just a trick of government, right? Transit provides another area, even in areas where you haven't traditionally thought of public transit as a place to do so. And we're trying to continue to enhance that in Kansas City.
Gosh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so many, you're already expanding my mind of different ways to think about transportation. That messaging one is interesting too. Stephen, can I bring you in? Just coming back to these kind of the difference of this moment. What are these forces that are reshaping this conversation we're about to have?
Yeah, I think you know, COVID event is often looked at this like huge obstacle and challenge that everyone's trying to recover from. But I think you can also look at it as an enormous opportunity. It has changed the mobility patterns, the rates that people work in an office, people travel differently. One of the really fascinating lessons that Amtrak has had since the pandemic is that we thought our primary ridership was based on commuter traffic, people going to meetings between DC, Philadelphia, New York, et cetera. And we've recovered and are exceeding our pre-COVID ridership levels and realized it's on the back of leisure travel and
Mm,
lifestyle travel, visiting friends and families, going to events. That sort of social aspect of mobility has, I think, been elevated in this post-COVID world. And I think this gives us the chance to rethink all of the planning paradigms that make us decide when do you invest or not invest in roads or other forms, and where do you need roads and other forms of transportation. So I don't think it's set yet. Like, this is a part of the dialogue, these chats we're
mhm.
having today is, how do you plan for the future of mobility, as sort of the use cases are shifting.
Yeah. That's fantastic. This social element. I'm going to tie this because I was mentioning I've been rewatching our past Future Fridays, and the very first one was on economic drivers and the fun economy. The experience economy is rapidly growing. People are looking for experiences right now. So that connection to transportation, that people are then going and finding these spaces and places where they have these incredible experiences, is an interesting thematic tie together. William, how about you? Forces at play right now.
Oof. It's a good question. And listening to what the mayor had to say and Stephen, I think I don't necessarily want to, maybe I want to build on versus disagree, or add to. I think COVID certainly changed a lot of things. And I'm coming at this from my experiences. And first, let me say that the foundation is mode and technology agnostic. Even though we have Toyota in our name, we are not about cars. So we work across everything. And inherently, what we've seen is what drives people, right? We saw the shift, or and to where people want to live and work, and there's still, maybe start with the idea that there's cities as a political designation, then there's the urban form that exists, and a lot of that, including here in the DMV where I live, large parts of Kansas City are really suburban density, right? And there's a lot of inherent value in what can we can get out of those forms, and how do we really maximize what we call the ecosystem services and land and quality of life. And I think it's driving a rethink in the ability to fundamentally take advantage of new forms of mobility, including the emergence of autonomous vehicles, the micromobility, a greater growing appreciation of active mobility. When I think about designing mobility solutions, I always think about every trip has one thing in common, and that's people, right? There's a pedestrian part to every journey, and it has to be accessible to people across all abilities, not just people that like myself, but people across the ability, disability, socioeconomic spectrum, because the best subway in the world doesn't provide any value if people can't navigate that subway or navigate the beginning and end destination. The best ideas around micromobility don't work if those systems aren't connected, aren't safe, and don't get people where they need to go.
Yeah.
And the value that, on demand, whether it's autonomous vehicles, privately owned personal mobility, still provide a lot of value, and the right form of mobility in the right way. And so I'm excited to hear about these things. Let's say maybe one fundamental shift that I think we've tried to take is a move away from kind of these prescriptive outcomes. Break this idea. Let me challenge this paradigm, that this false dichotomy of car-based urbanism and transit-oriented development.
Mm.
Those are prescriptive outcomes. There's important elements behind those, but what we really need to think about, what are the objectives that people want? What are the policy outcomes that governments, organizations, policy leaders like the mayor want to have? What do the civic community leaders want to have in terms of density,
Mm.
accessibility, tree canopy, green space? When we think of those as priorities, and I can list off probably 20 plus parameters that can go into this thinking, how can we then use those priorities and parameters and do some multi-objective optimization and use that to inform new ways of thinking,
Yeah.
updated codes, updated design guidelines, better integration of these mobility systems. Transit-oriented development isn't, there's nice elements, but it's the attributes of that transit-oriented development that might come out of the rethinking, not to have that necessarily as the end destination, because it may exclude other forms of important design and urban development
Yeah.
that are desirable for other individuals. And so, how
Yeah.
do we bring those into the conversation?
That's great. I mean, I love how look, I'm a system thinker. Anytime you can zoom out and talk to me about how this topic relates to this other topic, to me is often where we fall short in these conversations. We can get our blinders on and we think we're just talking about transportation as trains, and automobiles. And so bringing in shade canopy and urban heat island effect and the socioeconomic implications and the connectivity, I'm here for that, and I'm sure our audience is too. I want to shift over from a more Q&A format as we've been doing here, head into our ideas cast, because this is really when we conceived of what Future Fridays would be like. We said we wanted to make sure this is a place where everybody participating can have their voice as a part of it. So we've been light utilizing the Slido. I think we also have the chat open. I just want to make sure that the audience feels really encouraged to share their own ideas as we get into this visioning and this exploration and these next series of questions. So without further ado, we like to start really easy. We have some fun here. Let me slide myself to the side so you can see my background is where we have the question up right on the slide. So we keep that front and center. And the first one is just, what is your favorite form of mobility? We're exploring that subject already very widely, but I would like to just let the audience participate in Slido with their favorite form. We're going to go right around the horn here. I'm going to start because I've got the mic, and it hasn't been mentioned yet, but electric bikes. I don't even have one, and they're still my favorite form of mobility right now. My whole neighborhood has been transformed with people riding around with their kids on the back, the groceries in the front, and they're not even breaking a sweat, just zooming around town here in Hyattsville, Maryland, having a great time. So that's mine. William, how about over to you? What's your favorite form of mobility?
It is two wheels. I haven't gotten into the electric biking thing. I still like to work up a sweat. It's fighting off aging and as much as I can. And if the opportunity still allows and the wife lets me, I'll hop on the Ducati periodically too.
Nice. How about you, Stephen?
I should have to say rail because I worked at the DC Metro and now at Amtrak, but I'm going to have to say the bike as a general category.
Biker.
Electric
Okay.
bike 6 miles from home to work because I don't then show up sweaty, but then the non-electric bike on the way back using the city bike share system so I can get some exercise.
There you go. I want you also to know, Stephen, you got some friends in the audience here. We got a few train lovers and a lot of bike lovers. How about you, Mayor?
I am walking and pushing a stroller all the time. So you can improve every sidewalk for me, good ramp access, but that stroller with two kids on is kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
my way right now.
I love that. I'd never thought of the stroller as a form of mobility, but my 2-year-old would agree. The stroller is a great way to get around. They can just take a nap and get where they're going. Awesome. Well, that was our warm up, a nice and easy one. We got some walkers. We got a roller skater in the audience as well. I love that, and definitely some other e-bike lovers. So that is certainly a part of the future vision. So this next question is for me like the joy of being at a museum, which is that we really get to have this visioning exercise, and I think there's a quote which I'll butcher, but I'll just say this idea of if we want to get people to participate in the future, it's not telling them the work to do. It's painting the picture of what that vision looks like, an inspiring picture of what these future cities are going to look like in terms of mobility. And I can't think of any greater people to help us do that visioning than the three of you. So maybe I'll go back around the horn the other way here and start with the mayor. When you see that vision going out, what are some of the elements of it? And I welcome you to paint that in a anecdote as specific or just generally kind of elements of cities in the future and how people get around.
It sounds so not futuristic, but heavy rail connections. I love being on a panel with Stephen because we spend so much time talking not just to Amtrak, but of course to our state DOTs, for me in the states of Missouri and Kansas, about how we can not just expand rail access on rail lines that are still in existence. How do we find financing? How do we negotiate with our railroad partners around our country? But then, of course, better and more consistent linkages between major cities, particularly outside of the Eastern Seaboard. I think connection via rail is going to be a tremendous difference maker throughout much of America, and hopefully something that happens sooner rather than later. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah,
Love that plug.
I was going to say, Stephen, that sounds like a tee up for you. So,
Yeah. I think the vision for mobility needs to be a convenience-focused vision.
mm,
And I think that's something that cities, particularly the more dense part of cities, need to continue to upsell. I think the suburbs right now, for a large part of America, think they dominate convenience, and that having a car, ownership of a car, equals convenience. And I think that we need to show them that not having ownership of a car and having access to all these choices, whether it be rail or bus or Uber and electric bikes, that is why you should want to live somewhere, because you have that sort of freedom of choice.
I guess I'm up next. Let me build on that.
okay.
I think there's two elements to this, and give me a moment. I think the first part is what my colleagues at the PREX lab at MIT have termed autonomous universal access, or AUA. It's sort of a play on ADA, and let me explain what that means. Autonomous, not just the inclusion of emerging autonomous vehicles and ride hail and what that does mean and allow for people to eliminate parking and have that on-demand ability. It's also about autonomous and the autonomy and the agency that individuals should have to go where they want, when they want. Universal, of course, universal barrier-free access, and not just the ADA minimums, but truly equivalent barrier-free mobility in terms of time and cost, convenience, and equivalency. And then, that accessibility. And that includes the connectivity, the shortening, the optionality of how these different forms of mobility work. And that's important from how we think about how that integrates in new ways of the urban landscape and the urban planning from a safety, connectivity, accessibility standpoint. And we thought about it at 4 different scales. But it's also the evolvability, right? As anyone who's been involved, and the mayor probably knows very well, you're probably dealing with the legacy of decisions and investments and the concrete that was poured 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So how can we use these same design principles to develop and make investments that work today that allow us to effectively and efficiently evolve in an
Yeah.
equitable, fair way as these new forms of mobility progress in a 5, 10, 20, 30-year timeframe. Because the one thing you don't
Yeah.
want to have to do is break concrete. And you don't want to be constrained by the decisions that were made today. We don't want
Yeah.
today's solutions to be tomorrow's problems.
Well, I want to hit that right in the head because I think not that this is the elephant in the room or something, but we are America. We have a car. We've developed a car-based culture and urban plan, and so I hear this perception of, the future has this more. There's an equity component to it. There's a question of access and an agility to how we can change and do that. But historically, we can go way back in time and look at the rails, but I'm not sure everybody in the audience, and I really, again, I want to keep soliciting the audience to please share more of your vision and thoughts in Slido, because we want to hear your thoughts on this too. But I wonder just this visioning, and maybe Mayor, I'll put this one to you as an elected official, as you view like engaging the participants, the residents, the citizens in this visioning, or how they buy into that vision of this is the future we want. We see the benefits of, you mentioned rail. There's other examples here as well, but how do we? It's not so much a question of how do we overcome that as much as how do we paint this vision in a way that people see themselves in it and are inspired by it.
Frankly, I'm going to steal from the line I heard earlier before. It's convenience focused. And
Mm,
so long as we actually are looking at how is this enhancing opportunities for folks to engage more broadly in our cities, how is it reducing cost, how is it reducing time, and then the biggest thing for everything I deal with in local government, how is it easier than something I'm doing today? Right? From waste management to public safety to transportation. That is actually at the core. If I ever teach in an MPA school, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So it is just that sort of easier reduction of barriers to entry. I think the public is willing to adopt new things, right? 10 years ago, it was great for us to have a phone number at 311. Now, frankly, you're behind if you don't have an app-based way that people can yell at you. And so I think it's the same situation here, looking at ease for the user, how you create better access, never lecturing people about what is needed as if they will believe in bike lanes all of a sudden, right? It's still controversy wherever it seems to go, but it is actually saying this creates an easier, more affordable place and community for you.
Before you go, William, I want to bring in a comment from the chat here. This is from Jared Alves. Mobility isn't just about speed, but about having close destinations. Driving lets you go farther faster, but walking is fastest when it's a block to the store.
Yeah.
So I'm just tying in this. I think it's still this theme of convenience, but this assumption of one mobility form of
Yeah.
mobility is the most convenient lacks context. That
Yeah.
depends where you're going, what you're trying to get to. Other people are bringing up access to parks within the chat here as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
It's kind of this multiplicity of it. William, something
Yeah.
you want to add there?
No, I fully agree. I've been looking at the comments, and I think these are the right ideas, right? And so, how do we achieve that? And some of that is this idea of, again, this approach that we've been trying to think about is we call it kind of atomizing the land, right? Like, how do we move away from these designated large tracts of land or multi blocks that might be designated as, oh, this is single family housing or this is multi-unit dwellings. When you break that up, you can bring the parks to within
Right.
10-minute walk and out, or and you can bring the goat. You eliminate the food deserts. You also reduce the need and the challenges of getting to jobs, right? Now,
Right.
some of people may be thinking, oh, he's talking about a 15-minute city. I'm not. um, actually don't know what that means. I don't like that term. There's the evidence actually shows it can actually lead to segregation because you're still creating these desirable kind of enclaves. But why I also have a problem with it is I don't know what 15 minutes means. I talked about getting on a bike. In 15 minutes, I can easily go get on my bike, get my shoes on, go 3+ miles while riding safely and following the rules. Somebody with a mobility limitation may be able to go a third of a mile, right? Now, ballpark, what does that mean? Pi r squared. I can go roughly 100 times as far as somebody with a mobility limitation. So 15 minutes doesn't, what does that mean to people? But we can still build on these ideas of accessibility, and then how do we use metro or cars to get to these different kind of polycentric blocks. but
Yeah.
this is, some of this is around, green, you know, greenfield development. But as cities rezone and rethink, they can also bring in these elements. How do we bring these
Yeah.
attributes closer? Yes, if we can get rid of parking lots, we can turn that parking lot into that urban park. In the suburbs, we can
Yeah.
do the same thing, right? So I have options. I can walk, I can bike. But is it so bad if I need to, if I, take a vehicle to go 2 or 3 miles to get a lot of groceries or
Sure.
get a large package?
Yeah.
Options.
Stephen, I want to give you the last word on vision here, especially since William kind of teed up this. It's not just about the transit, it's what is around the transit. I mean, you do commercial real estate around Amtrak. So how do you think about that relationship of real estate, urban planning to transit itself?
Yeah, it's always about having that mix of uses,
Mm.
which I think is what the sort of 15-minute city movement is kind of promoting. I think what is very difficult in achieving that vision is getting to that critical mass that's necessary to attract a mix of uses.
Mm.
And when a lot of I would get asked all the time when I was at Metro and now at Amtrak, like, we don't want just a housing project. We also want a grocery store, and we also want a park, and we also want this thing. And the community has to accept that, especially in this era with costs sort of increasing quickly, you can't do a one phase project that delivers all of those things, and that we have to get comfortable sort of building our way up, but we need to reduce the barriers that sort of stop that pace of progress, and slow it.
The other main theme in the chat right now is that America is behind. We need to look internationally. There are successful models across Asia and Europe that we could learn from. So I appreciate there's some fantastic audience participation here. Let me click over because the next step after we create a beautiful vision is we need to figure out how to get there. And so there's this question of the work, and of course it's multifaceted. I do challenge us here in terms of a prioritization of some of this work we need to do. Mayor, I'm going to start with you on this one. When you think about this vision, this transformation, these changes we're looking at, what are some of those key levers? Where do you see the most critical work to focus on at the moment?
First of all, always identifying, if not necessarily the resources, the paths for resources. And so obtaining revenue structures that in your communities or organization allow you to have consistent funding in certain spaces, even if busy today or now or occupied now, understanding that through rental car fees, through any number of steps, that you actually have something that's funded. The other thing that I think is really important is making sure that in a community's regular budget, both state and local, the two of which I know best, you do actually make sure that infrastructure isn't just a conversation about replacement and repair. It can't just be crumbling bridges, although those are certainly very important. It is how do you best modernize as part of it? How are you actually adjusting and adapting to better standards long term? That's frankly how we have expanded a bike lane network, right? It is not just replacing an old bridge with an old bridge that looks, or a new bridge that looks exactly the same. And so I would say that's a key part. The other thing that I would say is just not allowing yourself to be overburdened by a price tag. They are all big. They are substantial. But honestly, if I looked at my annual police budget and just looked that out over like the next 10 years, I'm like, my God, Kansas City's spending like, feels like $1 trillion. I mean, you do understand that you will continue to have budget, that you need to make sure that you're prioritizing it for a city that is attractive to folks. I'll make one final point because I'm from Middle America. The thing that I love most is when Kansas Cityans go to other places. And they're like, well, while I love kind of this car dependent life and all of that, I was insert your place, Copenhagen, and I loved that I could walk. I loved accessibility to different forms of transit and access and all of that. It is in some ways reminding people and sharing stories that this is actually something that is possible, that it is done, and that it isn't just for over there, but it can be part of enjoyment in your own life as well.
Great comments, and that's such a consistent theme that I hear too, Mayor Lucas. Um, I think prioritizing is probably densification to make the sort of variety of mobility options work. And you hear about this all the time. A land use plan is the best transportation plan, is like the old adage that people like to say. But I think what we have sort of seen in the United States in the past decade or two is there has been a huge effort to increase zoning or do up zoning in transportation corridors to sort of increase the capacity for development and to enable densification. But then there are, you can look at so many plans across the country where people say nothing got built. And a large part of the challenge that I see and I'm wrestling with in my projects is, these transportation corridors are already inhabited. There's people who live there, or there's businesses that frequent there, and some of them are fearful of disruption or the sort of the challenge of redevelopment. But I think there's a lack of connecting with landowners, property owners, renters, and who can sign up to like a city registry and say, I'm interested in redevelopment of my property and assembling my property with my neighbors or relocating my business into a new development a block away. So if cities can start working on sort of building that people pipeline, I think that you're going to have more success on striking those development deals that lead to densification and take advantage of the zoning efforts that cities have been doing.
I think I've brought up some of these ideas around changing kind of this paradigm around car-based urbanism and transit-oriented development. But how do we get there? I think some of that comes from being able to be open and training a new generation of landscape architects and urban planners to really think about the new tools and ideas and designs. And some of that is involved, again, I've heard a couple of things that I view more as outcomes versus intended objectives. I don't think we should be focused on upzoning. In fact, there's some concern and a lot of evidence that be a little controversial that you can't densify your way to sustainability. Sustainability is an outcome from effective planning, including the maintenance of water management and tree canopy and things that densification can sometimes work against. And thriving cities actually need thriving suburbs to be healthy. So it's about updating the codes. It's about updating the best practices. It's about really being open to new ideas and approaches and thinking about outcome-based planning and understanding how to integrate new ideas and technologies that will allow us to I think what everyone on this panel agrees is that we can do a lot better. And I think we all kind of understand what is important, although policy is subjective. It's a matter of rethinking the ways we might get there. And creating the tools and knowledge that enable us to achieve those outcomes.
One thing I've heard throughout all of you is that there's not one lever. It doesn't work in isolation. And I recently finished the book Abundance with Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson, and it speaks to that. This Mayor Lucas, you brought up this consistency of the financing and the resources, right? William, you're talking about this. It's not just the density; it's what's also around it. All of you, I think, are speaking to this. These are big projects. These take time, and they're interconnected with the transportation itself, with the zone, with the building, with the people. And so, and I'm hearing a little bit in the chat too. It's not just this glossy photo idea of what this looks like. It breaks down into a lot of pieces that all need to come together to make these projects a success. So, just kind of hitting that highline vision of the ways that this is a multifaceted work that we need to take on.
Yeah. Well,
And
actually, can I kind of respond to something I saw in the comments? And I don't. There was I think I saw a comment about kind of this. It's going to be difficult to break, this idea of car-based urbanism. I've actually am working with and have worked with some developers who are actively breaking that concept, right? And when I talk with them and why they want to engage with some of the new ideas and tools that I've referenced is at the end of the day, they want to maximize the value of their investment in the land and communities that they're developing, right? And they recognize that there are different options. They recognize that they can actually provide better value to a growing population and the people that want to live and work and play in the communities that they're developing. It doesn't have to be car-based urbanism. The results that we're talking about, I think a majority of people on this discussion and on this webinar want to see will come about when there's a recognition that we can achieve alternate outcomes because it benefits everybody, including the developers, because they will provide high value to their customers, high value to the governance organizations, the political leadership in the community.
I will also now click us over because part of this is, yes, there's the challenges, there's the barriers we have. And I think one of the major ways we get there is by looking at successes that we can scale. So I'd like to just take a few minutes. We are heading towards the end of our time together, but Mayor Lucas, again, I'd just love to start with you, if I may, because you've done some pretty innovative, cool stuff. Any of the successes and stories that you'd love to share with our audience today?
I'll actually talk about our streetcar development in Kansas City once more. It's a project that starts in the mid-20 teens. It has gone through way too many presidential administrations in little chunks each time. We have worked with different DOT administrators throughout the process, and it is transforming, ironically, access to the river, our oldest transit asset, if you think about it, and other portions of the city. And so, I have been proud of it for a few different steps, right? We were unveiling certain transit only lanes yesterday. It is zero fare. It is giving access to a large amount of the region, allowing for us to build up what I think has been the strong ridership. So I think that is a very exciting one. A kind of junior bit of excitement of mine. I think reconnecting communities still matters. I think it still has true relevancy. And the work that we're actually doing to bridge traditional divides, even if not tearing down bridges, indeed it never really was that. It's instead, how can you think about, back to our convenience focus, right, the pedestrian, the cyclist, the user who is trying to get efficiently through this area that has been cut off for 3 generations. And so that's, I think, something that, back to my dose of optimism, gives me optimism. And I think we're seeing some success in our early promulgation.
William, do you have a success story?
I can think of a few. McKinney, Texas, in their recent master plan. It's a high growth area, suburb of Dallas Fort Worth. Looked at objective, and it made a lot of progress in getting most of what people need, 85+% within that relatively short distance of and options. And I'm mentioning Texas because that's typically when people think Texas, you think of that typical car-based urban sprawl, and we're seeing interest from the city there. There's a community in New Braunfels, new development between San Antonio and Austin that has been developing along this way, and thinking about how do they actually reduce, including reducing parking in the community in what is clearly traditionally a car-based urbanism, and one that's outside of the U.S. Brisbane, Australia, probably one of the most suburban cities in the world from a density standpoint, doing a redevelopment in North Shore Hamilton, brownfield redevelopment. It's not well served by traditional public transit, but they want to connect that new development to the public transit that they're making investments in the city, but also making it a very livable, walkable, connected city while still holding true to a lot of the aesthetics that the community wants. And so you're seeing some mixed use, single family homes. How do you bring these together? So we're starting to see some changes and opportunities here, in that are breaking the paradigm. Um, I'll leave it there.
That's fantastic. Stephen.
Yeah, I'll jump in and talk about my experience at Metro, mostly because I was there the longest. But we had published a 10-year strategic plan for, we call it joint development, sort of a federal name for transit-oriented development. And it talked about a lot of our success stories. And I think one of the big reasons why the DC Metro has been so successful and sort of suburban densification and development around those rail stations is just the ownership of a lot of land. And that is the hardest thing for a developer to do, is to get enough property together that they feel like there's a pipeline of projects that is going to keep them busy for the next few decades, and they can then start attracting enormous amounts of capital to. And that is really what I see the barriers. I get asked all the time, like, why does this Amtrak station have nothing around it? It's in a good location. And I'm like, well, the ownership of that land, there's 100 different owners. Half of them are public, some city, some state. And then grandpa died and he gave 20 properties to his grandson who doesn't even live in that city anymore. So I think, this land assemblage is a big challenge in trying to get densification. Another great example, I think, is Nashville. I'm super amazed by Nashville. Like they're doing so much all across the city. It's not just downtown, and they don't even have a train line. It's all a bus network. It's very impressive.
You all have some fans in the audience. We have Howard Mark saying DC Metro Rail with 128 miles of heavy rail serving the entire DMV has pulled commuters out of their cars. It's awesome. So shout out to the DMV there. And Benjamin Johnson, I live in the DMV and visited KC a few years ago. The streetcar was efficient and enjoyable. Beautiful city overall.
Love it.
So I think you all are success stories in the work you're doing, and I'm so grateful for that. We are almost out of time. I'm going to sneak in one more because I just think this topic is so expansive. We're going to do this as a lightning round. I'm going to let each of you go once. And this is just, we covered a lot today, but is there anything we didn't talk about? And we cleared the chat, but two people shared. One, we need to make sure, this was mentioned, but I'll highlight that we need to make sure people, the elderly, differently abled populations are part of this conversation. And safety, safety, safety.
Yeah.
The safety of how we get around is also critical. So we did focus on convenience. I think we mentioned those others, but I just want to elevate those audience voices. A quick final word or something we didn't talk about, or you want to highlight? Start with William.
Well, I was going to say, I saw the comment. Yeah, how do we make this work for everybody, and everybody all the time, everywhere? And sorry, how do we prevent gentrification from happening? Because when you make something attractive, including accessible transport, it tends to drive the gentrification without the corresponding policy and other urban planning that is necessary to prevent it.
Stephen, final word.
I think it is about overcoming the aversion to change and the fear of change, and finding different ways to engage communities out than the traditional like urban planning community engagement process that actually gets a pretty narrow amount of participants. And really calling communities, not everybody's going to want to change, and say, put your name out there. Who wants this change to happen? And we're going to focus on you.
I think what I would say is, what is the national conversation? What's the impact on the national conversation of a less interested U.S. Department of Transportation in the policy discussions more broadly that we're having?
Wow. Mic drop. Fantastic. Listen, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I know we're digital here, but if we can do a digital or on your own round of applause for our panelists and speakers, really appreciate your candor, your expertise, the leadership, the work you're doing. It's really exemplary, and we're really grateful to have you as a part of our Future Cities conversation here at the National Building Museum. Before everyone goes, I'm going to just share my screen briefly so I can offer you some coming attractions. This was the last Future Friday. And so while that is bittersweet, what I have to share is that what's coming next is even more exciting, which is that we are opening a physical exhibition at the National Building Museum all about downtowns and how the pandemic has transformed them. So stay tuned, go to nbm.org. You will be notified, or you can sign up for our newsletter to hear about when that exhibition is opening. It's going to have interactive exercises in it, a sidewalk ballet, a city action hall. It's going to be incredibly dynamic and interesting. So, for those of you that can make it, please join us in person at the National Building Museum as we continue to tell this story of optimism all about the future of cities. For those that want to get involved, here's my email. I welcome individuals, organizations, nonprofits, for profits. We want everybody's voice to be a part of this. The goal here is broad participation, and we hope that you will join us as we go on this journey together. So, that is my final thank you, moment of gratitude again for our panelists and for all of the audience that participated. Some fantastic participation in the chat. We are so grateful for that. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your summer. Thank you all so much for joining the Future Friday series. You will see all of the recordings from past sessions are available on YouTube, so feel free to check out the previous sessions in case you missed that. And again, thank you, happy Friday, and goodbye.